The following is a production of Texas Lutheran University. For more information, please visit tlu.edu.
Hi, I'm Ashlie McEachern with the TLU Marketing Department. This evening, I'm joined by New York Times columnist, PBS NewsHour analyst, and best-selling author David Brooks. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Brooks.
Good to be here.
Good. Now, your latest book, The Social Animal, really looks into how how neuroscience and sociology and our unconscious mind play into how we view things like politics and culture. What made you kind of depart from your regular writing on economics and politics to go into this area?
Partly, I don't actually believe in political books. So I'm in the middle of my fourth book, and none of them are political. So I always like to do a book that'll be more long-lasting than the political stuff. But I sort of got into that topic, started out by doing why are people dropping out of high school?
Yeah.
And once you get into that topic, you learn a lot of the things happen in the first 3 years. And then when you start thinking what's happening in the brain in the first 3 years of life, then you get into neuroscience. And once I got into it, it was just fascinating. We're in the middle of this incredibly fast advances. And it tells us not only things about high school dropouts, but why we fall in love with who we fall in love with, why some marriages work and why some don't, why people are happy when they're 60 but not happy when they're 40. And so there was just a lot of fascinating information that I was learning, so I sort of thought I'd share it.
What's kind of a simple way you can explain how the unconscious mind affects things like personality traits or social norms and even emotions?
Right. Well, some of it has to do with, the first thing to be said is most of our thinking is unconscious. Only about 2% of our thinking is conscious. All the rest is going on below the level of awareness. And so a lot of how we react to the world, for example, has to do with how we attach to our parents by the age of 18 months. And so some people, they have what they call secure attachments. And if you're 18 months old and mom leaves the room, you cry for a little bit, then you sort of settle. And when mom comes back, you go over and give her a hug. And some people have sort of established patterns of that. And if they have that strength at 18 months, then when they're 20 or 30 or 40, they're going to know how to relate to teachers, they're going to know how to relate to friends.
Exactly.
But about 20% of the people, they don't have a communication with mom at 18 months. They're what they call avoidantly attached. They're sending signals, but nothing's coming back. And so they don't quite have models in their head. How do I build a friendship? And so at age 70, those people have 1/3 fewer friends than people who are securely attached. And then some people have disorganized attachments, which they just don't have any signals. And those people are always very touchy. And what happens the first 18 months doesn't shape your whole life, but it sets a pathway that can really lead to a whole set of lifelong behaviors that are tremendously powerful.
Yeah.
So that's one example of how unconscious model formation, how do I build a relationship, is really set very early, and you're not really thinking about it. It's just how it happens.
Yeah, and in the book you follow a couple, Harold and Erica, but you also talk about their upbringing and their relationship with their parents, and they're totally different.
Right.
Can you kind of talk about them a little bit and their opposites and why maybe they exhibit the characteristics they did?
Yeah, so Harold, the guy, I made up these two characters because I just wanted to take the experiments out of the lab and show how they might work in real life. So I created these fictional characters just to give people an example. Plus I thought it would be more fun to have a story. And so there's a story. And so Harold is, he's middle class, grew up in a middle class suburban high school, kind of shallow at first, sort of a jock. And then he gets a little deeper as life goes on.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's what happens to most of us. And then Erica is the product of a troubled home, a broken home. And her mom has periods of depression, and Erica, even as a young girl, has to take care of her. She has trouble controlling her anger, but she's very ambitious and driven. And so over the course of the book, against my plan, Erica just had a stronger personality and sort of took over. And so it's a little about how she fell for Harold and how she built a career. And it takes them straight up all the way through their lives, just illustrating different parts of the research. You know, one of the things that leaps to mind right now, some people are born, and this is more genetics than nurture, they're risk takers. There's an experiment that was done where a guy took young babies, put salt water into their mouth, and salt water, and then salt water, and then sugar water. And some babies hyper-react to sugar. Something's different here. Some babies are very calm. And the babies who are very calm, even at 4 days old, by the time they're 20, they're doing rock climbing, they're doing X Games. They love risk because they need that big charge to give themselves a feeling. The people who are reacting sharply to the change in the water, They don't like risk because they're so sensitive to it. And so some of those things happen early in life. It's just baked into who we are genetically. And so I'm just trying to illustrate things like that through the stories.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see the science part that really relates to just how we are in our everyday lives and
Right.
what we think and how we act. That was
Yeah.
very interesting. I want to go from the social animal to your column for the New York Times. And you actually wrote a column a while back called History for Dollars. And in that, you really talked about the benefits and the importance of a liberal arts education.
Right.
And Texas Lutheran University is a liberal arts college.
Right.
Can you talk about why you are a proponent of it and maybe give college kids some advice as why they should consider it?
Yeah, well, the first thing is very simple, is that if you are in the liberal arts, if you're writing a lot of papers, if you're reading a lot of books, you're going to learn how to write well. And just on a practical level, that is a very important thing to know how to do. If you're in any organization, wherever you go to work, the people who can write well have a lot of power. I see it covering the White House. Sometimes policy is set by the speechwriters because they're the people who can write it down.
Yeah.
And so they actually end up setting the policy, even though they're supposedly only the speechwriters. The second thing to be said is that how you're going to do in life, a little of it is determined by your IQ, but the real things that's going to shape how you're going to do in life and how happy you're going to be is, like I said before, can you relate to other people? Can you build solid friendships? Can you control your emotions? Can you respond to stress well when things go badly? And a lot of that has to do with your emotional repertoire. And if you're reading novels or listening to music or looking at paintings, you're building your emotional repertoire. How you emotionally respond to things. And so middle-aged guys like me are not supposed to talk about emotions. But one of the things the research shows is emotions are really more powerful than reason most of the time.
Yeah.
And so I think people who have say you read all these Victorian novels, then you're in some trouble with your girlfriend or your boyfriend. Well, you can say, oh, well, this sort of happened in that book. And you have a repertoire to fall back on to understand what you're feeling. And it's better than going through life totally confused about what you're feeling. And so I would say that actually is not to be underestimated in its importance.
You use a very interesting term in that article called the Big Shaggy.
Yeah.
Can you explain that more?
Right. Well, the Big
everybody?
Shaggy is just a word for the unconscious, really. But I called the Big Shaggy, well, partly the reason I did it is, if you remember Where the Wild Things Are, which is a book by Maurice Sendak, which is actually about the unconscious. It's about a little character named Max, who's a boy, and he has a dream. He gets in a fight with his mom, and he has a dream in which these big, shaggy beasts come and visit him, the wild things, and he tames them with a magic trick. But in the book, that's supposed to be his unconscious thoughts coming to him. And so that inspired me, instead of having just a boring word like the unconscious, to have a word or a phrase, the Big Shaggy, which was supposed to describe the things that really go on in us. And when you're in a period of emotional turmoil, it doesn't feel like neat little things unconsciously. It's this powerful upsurge of either you're humiliated, or you're in love with somebody, or you're really angry. And these emotions just sweep over and take over you. And so I wanted to sort of get at how violent they can be and how they can totally sweep over you, and how you can get in these frenzies. And that's what the unconscious is. It's not a neat little thing. It's very powerful.
And you talk about how you need to befriend your Big Shaggy, this inner beast, and know how to react to it.
Yeah. You have to, if you get swept up in fear or a love affair, you have to know how to discipline it. And what's really important is emotional discipline. And so a lot of people are involved in relationships where they're either totally cold and aloof, or they're voracious and they're jealous. And understanding that and how to build structures so you're emotionally disciplined. And what do I do with my life to make sure I'm not out of control? A lot of it is just little things people do, or the little forms of courtship. So you don't fall in love all at once, you take steps one at a time. And so you structure things. And a lot of it is understanding how to do that. And then some of it is just strictly biological. One of the studies I have in my I have a bunch of studies about falling in love, which people tend to marry people with their eyes width similarly far apart, with nose similarly far apart. They marry people whose immune systems are complementary to their own, and they can tell that through saliva. When people kiss, they swap DNA samples, and unconsciously you can tell when somebody's immune system is similar to your own. And so that's a little sign that there's so much going on in really what is probably the most important decision you make.
Yeah. All very, very interesting stuff. Science, sociology, politics, you do it all.
Well, it's all human nature.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, thank you.
Students at TLU engage in high-impact educational experiences that include civic engagement, aesthetic expression, critical thinking, and a focus on intercultural knowledge in a community that welcomes the interplay of faith and reason.